We're a matter of days away now from Tears of the Kingdom finally releasing worldwide, and while I am hugely excited for this game, I've also been wondering what comes next for The Legend of Zelda. So will we continue along the same open world trajectory as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, or are we going to go back to a previous style of Zelda game? I also asked you what you want after Tears of the Kingdom, so today I'm going to lay out what I'd like to see next, and then we're going to have a look and see what the community says. Well, Tears of the Kingdom isn't officially out yet, but we as the Zelda community have already started looking ahead as to what comes next. What will the next Zelda game look like? Will Nintendo continue creating massive open worlds, giving us tools to play with and a big sandbox, or will Nintendo go back to a more traditional style of Zelda game like Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time? And it will be interesting to see how long it takes and what a Nintendo platform actually looks like when the next Zelda game releases. Feels like we're in a golden age of Nintendo at the moment. The Nintendo Switch continues to sell incredibly well, no doubt boosted by the Tears of the Kingdom OLED Switches recently. I know I bought one. Super Mario Bros. Just made $1 billion at the box office, which is highly likely to lead to more Nintendo movies. However, the Switch feels like it's coming to the end of its life, and Nintendo probably don't want another generational transition from the Wii into the Wii U, because to be honest, that went really, really badly. Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom took 6 years, and that was with the same engine, so it could be 2030 before we see the next mainline Zelda game. But in terms of what is next for The Legend of Zelda, I do think we've got a few options. More open world Zelda, like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. A slightly pared back open world with more linear story elements. And also we've got classic Zelda remakes, we've got some Wii U ports potentially on the way, and also working with partner companies as well. Okay, before we dive into your comments, let's go into each of these items separately. So first of all, partner companies. Well, Nintendo worked with Brace Yourself Games, a small indie company for Cadence of Hyrule. In a similar way, they worked with Koei Tecmo for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. So arguably, Age of Calamity was a much bigger game than Cadence of Hyrule. I'd really like to see what indie companies could do with The Legend of Zelda, particularly the team behind Kena Bridge of Spirits, and that was Ember Labs. They did a short film, and that was like a love letter to Majora's Mask. Their first game was really, really good, and it was Kena Bridge of Spirits. If you haven't played that, that is available on the PlayStation platform, also on PC as well, and that was a really, really good game. Age of Calamity and other Musou games, they're not really my thing, to be honest, but I do know there are lots of fans out there. I would really like to see Nintendo branch out and let more companies help with the Zelda franchise. Well, next up we got remakes of classic Zelda games, so if Nintendo were to look backwards, then I would love to see a remake of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. A lot of people say this is their least favourite Zelda game, however, I really like it, and if it were brought up to today's standard, this could be a very good entry indeed, especially with that sword combat. A Link to the Past would be another great option. Grezzo remade Link's Awakening in that unique top-down style. It'd be really good to see us apply to other 2D Zelda games. Well, next up we got those Wii U ports. So we got Twilight Princess HD and Wind Waker HD apparently very, very close to release on Nintendo Switch. They've been heavily rumoured for years now, with some thinking Nintendo just want to get their Tears of the Kingdom marketing cycle out of the way before releasing it. Now I'd love to play both of these games on Nintendo Switch, and that would make it possible to play pretty much every mainline Zelda game on a single machine. Well, next up, we could continue with the way things are going, like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and we could get more open-world Zelda games. So Nintendo could decide to complete the Breath of the Wild and the Tears of the Kingdom trilogy. Now, I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom yet, and I don't know if it suits a trilogy. At this point, it is hard to know what Nintendo could do. So they're opening up the sky, we've got new abilities. Given what we know today, Tears of the Kingdom could easily surpass Breath of the Wild. I don't think there's a precedent for Nintendo keeping the same style for more than 2 games. So we had Ocarina, Majora's Mask, they were 2 games. You've got Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, there's 2 games with the same style as well. They've already been working this way for about 10 years, so I imagine Nintendo would probably want to mix it up after Tears of the Kingdom. Well, finally, we have the option of a new Zelda game and a new style. So Nintendo could change style completely. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom look great. Personally, I love the art style, but Nintendo games in general and Nintendo consoles really could do with an upgrade. It's highly likely we're going to see the successor to the Nintendo Switch between now and the next mainline Zelda game. It'd be interesting to see how the story in Tears of the Kingdom plays out, and where the next Zelda game might take place. Now, I've heard calls for sequels to previous Zelda games, like a sequel to Twilight Princess or a sequel to Majora's Mask. But before starting on the journey to the next Zelda game, it is likely Nintendo will assess feedback from Tears of the Kingdom, balance what fans want with also what Nintendo has in store. For me, the next Zelda depends on a few factors, including reception to Tears of the Kingdom, the Nintendo platform they're going to be developing the game on, plus where fans are and what they want, and also what makes financial sense for Nintendo at the time. Well, in terms of what I want from the next Zelda game, I would like for Nintendo to continue down the open world Zelda. I really do like that, but I would like them to balance it a little bit more with the linear story elements. But overall, I really do like the open world Zelda formula. Well, that is what I want, but next up, let's have a look at what you want. So I asked the Triforce Times community what you wanted next, and I got some fantastic responses. So thank you to everyone who responded out there to that comment on YouTube. Really appreciate it. But before I dive into the individual responses, I wanted to have a look at some of the stats. So it's a small sample size. I had 44 comments on the post that I put out, and I put all the responses into categories. So in terms of those categories, people who wanted more Hyrule Warriors, that was about 2.9%. We had a sequel to classic Zelda, that was about 5.9% of responses. Then we had a new 2D Zelda game, that was about 8.8% of responses. And then Wind Waker and Twilight Princess ports, that was about 11.8% of responses. And then we get into the meaty options, so more open world Zelda, that was about 20.6%. And then a little bit higher than that, we had classic Zelda remakes, that was 23.5%. And then finally, new Zelda, so that is more linear with more open world elements, that was about 26.5%. So looking at the results there are 3 clear frontrunners. So more open world Zelda, like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, with nearly 21%. Classic Zelda remakes, that's second, that's nearly 24%. And also a new Zelda that blends linear and open world, and that came in first at about 27%. Well, the community seems torn on where to go next. A portion of the audience wants to continue down that open world route, but some are looking back and want classic remakes. So I think finding that compromise of a more linear story and open world is probably the way to go, and maybe that is what Tears of the Kingdom is actually going to provide. I don't know yet, given we are days away from release. This is also a very small sample size, as I mentioned, but hopefully you found that interesting, and it is a nice insight to what the Triforce Times community is thinking about for the next Zelda game. But now, let's dive into your comments in a little bit more detail, and I've picked out a good majority of ideas here from the comments. Well, President Evil 2, that is a great name by the way, says new art style. Ash Williams says Majora's Mask sequel made in the same style as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I like that a lot, that is very good. And Robert Adams says Hyrule Warriors, Age of Upheaval, and that is a very good name. Personally, I'm not into the Musou games myself. As I mentioned before in the video, I know there are a lot of fans out there, and 10 out of 10 there, Robert, for that name. That is really good. So next up, formerly YGS. I want another 2D Zelda that isn't a remake. We can't be stuck with Triforce Heroes as their final 2D Zelda forever. So another 2D Zelda that isn't a remake, that is a very interesting proposition. I wonder if Nintendo would do that in 2023 or 2024. Next up we got Zar Andrew Stra, so sorry about the pronunciation there. Aonuma has stated that the open world style is the new definitive format for the Zelda franchise. I wouldn't have high hopes for a linear, conventional Zelda. Those days are gone. And Petralgan agrees, and they say, I don't think there's going back to more restricted and more linear 3D Zelda game. Luke Beacom says, I want a Link to the Past remake. A Link Between Worlds doesn't count, because that game is a chronological sequel to A Link to the Past. Luke, I agree with you 100%. I would love to see A Link to the Past remake, having played through it again recently. Really, really love that game, and I would love to see a remake. I would like to throw that question back to you. What style would you like to see that remake in? Do you want to see similar to Link's Awakening from the Grezzo team, or do you want to see something else? So Metzel Rio says, I would like Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 a remake, a combination into one game, HD graphics, story incorporated, and add new content. That would be such a banger. Well, Metzel Rio, I think that is a banger idea myself. Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 remake, combination into one game. Very, very ambitious, but to be honest, I like your ambition, and I like that idea. Well, Lex234 says, I'm hoping we get a classic 2D Zelda game while we wait for the next open world Zelda game. I hate the thought of waiting 6 or 7 years between games. I have to agree with you there, Lex. I hope for a 2D Zelda game as well, and the idea of waiting 6 or 7 years between games is a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. I don't want it to be 2030 before we get the next Zelda game. I don't even want to think how old I'm going to be at 2030. Okay, next up, Kevin Matter says, Breath of the Wild is my first Zelda game, so to me, this is a classic. But I did play Skyward Sword HD. I took a second playthrough to really appreciate it and enjoy it, because I was spoiled on not having to follow any kind of story progression. So I want something with a lot of replayability, where every playthrough can be different. So that's really, really interesting. If Breath of the Wild was your first Zelda game, and you had all that freedom and that open world, going back is probably quite difficult. So there's definitely something for Nintendo to bear in mind. Well, Dr. Lee Percussion says a third after Tears of the Kingdom. Make it a trilogy. I think that is probably likely. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for that comment. And then Mark James says, I would love to see them remake previous games to be open world. So that is a really interesting idea, Mark, going back in the catalogue and making them open world. I do think that would be quite a lot of work, but 10 out of 10, that is a really interesting idea. Really like that one a lot. Next up, Albert Keener, an open world classic Zelda, something akin to A Link to the Past, but in a 3D open world, classic items and dungeons, but on the scale of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So I like that. That is the combination of open world and classic Zelda. A lot of people have said the same thing, and definitely like that, Albert. Thank you for your comment. Really appreciate that one. Next up, Hero Shade 6. I want a classic 3D game next. It'd be cool if they rotated between 2D, classic, and open world. I, however, think the next one will be either a 2D one, so it's either a remake or a new game, or a new open world game. There's a lot to unpack in that comment there. So a classic 3D game, a 2D game, and rotating. But I do like that idea between rotating between games where you've got 2D, classic, and open world. That definitely sounds like there's a lot of work in the pipeline for Nintendo. Well, Codster is up next. I recognise Codster's name, so thank you for your comment. So I want more Link's Awakening remake type games with the same style, The Legend of Zelda, or A Link to the Past, or the Oracle games. So I think that is similar to what I was alluding to earlier. So you get Grezzo, who remade Link's Awakening, and apply that style to the other 2D games. But thank you, Codster. Really, really appreciate your comment. Next up, we got Tybalt, and again, sorry about the pronunciation of the names. So Tybalt says, it depends on what Tears of the Kingdom is. If it perfectly fuses, that's a good pun there, the linear storytelling to a massive open world gameplay, then fine, I want more. If the storytelling is the same as Breath of the Wild, then I would like the next game to integrate a linear storytelling to either be an open world game or old school Zelda, but bigger. So really, really good point there, Tybalt. I think we need to wait and see what Tears of the Kingdom is all about and see the elements of story, because if it's going to go bigger on that open world and the toolbox mechanics, but we're going to let the story just sit there just like Breath of the Wild did, well, I have to agree with you. I would like to see more of a linear storyline, but I do really like that open world and that toolbox. If you can fuse those concepts together, I think that is really the perfect marriage for Nintendo. So Doobie McDabby says, I would like to see the return of the boomerang and the slingshot as the main weapons, and also something a little bit more linear with the gameplay. So it's definitely an emerging theme here. People kind of want to go back to that more linear style. So thank you, Doobie McDabby, appreciate that. Paradox NCW, they say they can take multiple types of games like top-down, but it'd be cool if they incorporated more open-ended ideas from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So that is really interesting there, a top-down Zelda, but this time open world. Well, I guess there you're going back to the original Legend of Zelda. Okay, Drakenwild said, to be honest, I love Breath of the Wild format far more than the classic Zelda format. So if Tears of the Kingdom managed to strike the balance between what both groups of fans want, I would love to see that formula live on for a while. Drakenwild brings up a very, very good point there. We have to wait and see what Tears of the Kingdom is all about. And I do agree, Nintendo has to strike that balance between the feedback and try to understand what both groups of fans want. But I do imagine the open world formula is going to live on for a little bit. Next up, we got Sledgen. Oh, hi Sledgen, good to see you down there in the comments. Really appreciate it. And Sledgen says, I want an entirely new 2D Zelda. It has been a very long time. I agree with you there, Sledgen. I think that would be a great idea. And really appreciate you watching this video. Okay, next up, Zonai Theorist says, personally, I think the Zelda team should take a step back on games, adding on to the Zelda timeline following the release of Tears of the Kingdom. They spent over 12 years on them, and would need time to think about how they are going to top them. In the meantime, they should focus on making remakes of prior Zelda games, similar on how they decided to make a remake for Link's Awakening back in 2019. And I would also like to see more Zelda remakes in the same style as Link's Awakening in the 2019 remake. So thank you, Zonai Theorist. Appreciate your comment there, and that is another theme emerging from all the comments here. We want to see 2D Zelda games remade in a modern style. Next up, Media Gem says, okay, this is what I've been thinking for a while now. I think that Tears of the Kingdom is going to break Demise's curse, freeing Zelda and Link and even Dorf. In the next game, Link and probably also Zelda will be forced to prepare Hyrule for an incoming alien invasion. And perhaps throughout the game, your goal is to sail between spaceships to reach the moon, and then Link has to fight some sort of ancient evil that is responsible for the Blood Moon. They could also incorporate the aliens in Majora's Mask. Well, Media Gem, that is an absolutely wild idea. I'm not really sure aliens and the Legend of Zelda or even space mesh really well with the Legend of Zelda franchise, but, we're just going to have to wait and see. Well, next up we got Michael Bustamante, and Michael says, I'd say a world that has an alternate which affect each other, like Minish Cap, Ocarina, Link to the Past, and then gadgets necessary for temple completion and traversal, old school ideas and mechanics. Also, it'd be nice if it's on a new system for the better frame rates and also the graphics. If they can get a new mechanic that really hooks the whole thing up, then that'd be gold. It isn't really a bad Zelda game, and with those gameplay features. Well, thank you, Michael. Really appreciate it. So Michael there is looking back and would like a return to classic Zelda. Well, next up we got Adriana Nicole. So Adriana says, I love the 3D Zelda games, my favourite being Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild, with Wind Waker being a very close third. I could never go back to a 2D Zelda game, especially not with today's technology. I was thinking about something maybe in between Breath of the Wild and Twilight Princess, less open world but still having a linear story, still packed with side quests and NPCs, still the amazing Zelda that we know and love, but maybe not be able to complete the game in 20 minutes. So again, Adriana Nicole, thank you for that comment. And that really is a good emerging theme. So there's more open world, but with much more emphasis on the linear story. Again, let's wait and see for Tears of the Kingdom and what that does. Okay, next up, Link says, that is actually a good question. Honestly, I want them to go back to a more classic Zelda game. Breath of the Wild is fantastic for its open world game, but that plus Tears of the Kingdom will be 2 open world games in total. Not to mention, it's been 3 Zelda games having the same art style if you include Age of Calamity. I want a game where we have iconic musics like the Song of Storms and Midna's Lament. I want a game with every section having action in them. Breath of the Wild was more of a game where they told you the main quest right away. It was your choice to do it right away or no. I trust the Zelda team, so I'm fine with whatever they do, but if you were to ask me, I have absolutely no idea what kind of direction Zelda would go in after Tears of the Kingdom. Well, Link, looks like there you want to look back, but it looks like also that you've got a lot of trust in the Zelda team. I too have a lot of trust in the Zelda team, and want more of a combination of that open world and more linear story. Okay, next up, Splat the Crystal says, I'd love a new 2D Zelda. We haven't had one in nearly over a decade, unless you count Triforce Heroes. But after that, I want them to do more of a classic return to form, while retaining elements of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Ideally, I want a Zelda that starts with a classic grass, fire, water dungeon trio, then branching out into 4 or more other dungeons, of which you'll be able to explore in any order, given a good mix of classic and open world designs. Well, thank you, Splat the Crystal. That is a good theme that's been emerging throughout all the comments, and really appreciate you commenting and also watching the video too. Well, Nutter Bro says, this is going to sound like a cop-out, but I just want Nintendo to truly surprise us again. I could describe my idea of a perfect Zelda game, but the Zelda team always does a great job at giving us what we want, even though we didn't know we wanted it. That is all I want. I want something so creative that I couldn't have even imagined how bad I want it now, and I'm excited to see the next art style that they go with. They could go full Twilight Princess realistic again, or full Wind Waker cartoony again. It could look like anything. Well, thank you, Nutter Bro. Really appreciate it. And finally, we have What Evan. And What Evan says, I saw a review of Breath of the Wild. At the end, it said something on the lines of Breath of the Wild has redefined the conventions of Zelda, but it's important that the next game redefines the conventions of Breath of the Wild, which I think is very fitting. I think the open world is the direction to go, and it fits the franchise best, but also taking new risks with what we have now is important, even if some of the choices may be controversial, or if it may change the amount of freedom the game offers. But one thing I do want for it is to break the cycle. I think it's time to explore new races, lands, lore, and definitely villains. Well, that is it for all the community comments. Thank you so much, everyone, for commenting. Really appreciate that. But let me know down in the comments what you want to see after Tears of the Kingdom. I would love to hear what you think. Well, that is it for this video today for what comes after Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And thank you so much for watching. For more Legend of Zelda content like this, hit that subscribe button down below and subscribe to Triforce Times. Or you can check me out on Twitter at Triforce Times. Well, if you enjoyed this video, found it useful, liking and sharing the video would really help me out. Otherwise, check out all the other Legend of Zelda videos on the channel. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.